Lords, I rise to give the Green Group's strongest possible support for all of the amendments in this group, and to report that my noble friend Baroness Jones of Moorskool, I'm pleased to say, is recovering well from her operation last week. But if there's one amendment she is going to regret not being here for, it is Amendment 212 about Swiftbreaks. The noble lady is very passionate about Swifts. And any wonder, these amazing creatures, top speed of 110 kilometres an hour, travelling 5,500 kilometres each way for their migrations. They are the long-distance athletes. And they're making that journey, and then they're finding nowhere to raise their young. That's the reality of what we, by our actions, have created, and of course they are now red-listed. The noble Lord Randall has already set this out very carefully, and the other noble ladies have already said a lot here. I'm just going to note that when we debated a very similar amendment in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Now Act, Baroness Taylor of Stevenage, then on the opposition benches, said she was delighted to see the amendment from the noble Lord Goldsmith, that it was justified by the unique nature of these precious birds and their nesting habits, and it had the Labour Party's full support. Can we get to there, please? This is such a small measure. Why not? It's such a tiny action, a small cost. Yet, if you are a Swift, this is not a small thing. This is a matter of life or extinction. There's a lot of discussion, and the other amendments come to other things that we need to do, but the situation of Swifts is unique. I'll fully back the hedgehog highways and the gaps in fences and the other simple things, but the Swift bricks is just so simple. Now, coming on to, again, already very clearly introduced by the noble lady Baroness Freeman, 225, bird-safe buildings. Just to add a couple of points to this, the British Trust for Ornithology has done a great deal of work on this, estimating 100 million birds crash into windows of buildings in the UK each year. A third of them die as a result. That is a huge toll that's almost invisible. And this was back in 2022, the BTO did some research looking at planning rules, the local planning rules, and essentially there is no protection in any of our major cities, our major communities. And I'll going to take noble lords back to, just because this was a case study that illustrates what's happening on a day-to-day basis, but it happened in one day, so it really made an impact. This was back in 2023 in Chicago, and it was a result of citizen science efforts that went and on one day collected all of the sad carcasses of more than 1,000 birds that had flown into one building in the US. And you might recall the pictures, just this huge array of bird bodies laid out. And as was set out then, some very simple measures would have stopped that happening, the measures that this amendment calls for. Now I come finally to Amendment 227GA, which is in my name, which has considerable similarities to the amendment already introduced by the noble lady Baroness Parmenter, but perhaps goes a little further. It says that within 18 months of this Act, and I'm allowing more time because this is much broader than we need for, say, Swifts, regulations under the Building Act to protect the safety of, to provide opportunities for living and speeding space for mammals, birds, reptiles and insects. And I also talk about the need for resources for plants. Now, the inspiration for this, and this probably isn't unique, but probably fairly unusual, actually comes from an exhibition now still on, and I'd urge noble lords to go and see it, at the Design Museum. It's called More Than Human, and it's the first major exhibition of a growing movement of the more than human design, a new generation of designers who understand that humans can only flourish alongside other activities and systems. It's part of the Future Observatory, the Design Museum's national research program for the green transition. Just to give one example of the kind of thing, this piece of artwork, it's by André Jacques, the Trans-Species Rosette, a piece of a facade, a building made of cork that's ideal for mosses and grasses and bacteria and mould. Normally, when we design the facade of a building, it's designed to be impermeable, to stop anything growing, to keep everything out. What if we turn that round and start to think about what a different kind of society would look like? Very briefly, I'll also mention the sculpture for octopuses by Shim Abuku, experimented to see what colours octopuses liked and made the artwork as a result of that. So, my lords, I'm going to conclude with just something from my youth as a recollection. In 1988, I was a young journalist, and Australia was celebrating, some Australians were celebrating the bicentenary, the 200th anniversary of the start of the genocide of the Aboriginal people and the massive destruction of the environment of Australia that followed as well. They opened the Australian Parliament building, and almost immediately it was the bogong moth migratory season, and the building filled up with bogong moths. And no one had thought about this. They brought British Western design traditions and plonked them down in Australia, and that was the result. And I bring us forward now, so many decades later, the bogong moth, which the Aboriginal communities for over centuries had feasted on, had eaten but also protected. The bogong moth is now on the IUC red list, is gravely endangered. Something that only decades ago was just en masse is now threatened with extinction. We have to stop making buildings that have that kind of impact.